I am joined by senior writer Corey S. Clark. Is that correct?
Right.
Corey
Correct.
Corey
Scott.
Corey Scott Clark. And since I'm the oldest one on our staff, and you are the one with the best recall of everything, kind of pre, what's your cutoff year when you start forgetting things, Corey?
Well, to be honest with you, I forget more of like 2018 or 19 than I do like 1991 or 1990 or 1980. I would say 84 is probably where it gets a little hazy for me.
Oh, I thought meant like because like as you get older, you forget more recent stuff.
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
for me,
no,
sometimes I checked out in the middle of the lost decade, and I start forgetting things after that. But I mean,
yeah, I would say 99 is like when
yeah,
even the
okay.
2000 year, I remember that their record, and I remember who they played in the Orange Bowl and the score, but I don't remember like a lot of specific plays from that year. So I'd say 2000 is when I probably it
Gotcha.
started meaning.
So along those lines, we're gonna tap into your knowledge, Corey, and the little bit I can remember from way back when, and talk about some classic games in Florida State history. And we picked a good one to start out with, and that's the 19 one of my favorites, the 1991 Florida State Michigan game. And kind of interesting back then because I know you remember really well the lay of the land back then. It was all at that point because I mean Florida State. I think 87, maybe 88, 89, even there were some cases to be made that maybe they were the best team in the country by the end of the year, but they hadn't won anything. So Bowden kind of had the rap of he couldn't win the big one at this point. And they started 91 again, preseason number one, and were number one rolling into that Michigan game. Which kind of your feeling, going into that 91 season?
Yeah, so for the people that don't remember, and I'm sure there are quite a few people listening to this that weren't old enough. So 1990, they lost two games in a row. They lost at Miami, and then they lost. They deserved that loss, but then they lost
Mm-hmm.
at Auburn when they played well and just gave the game away. But in the middle of that Auburn game, I think early in the second quarter, they made a switch at quarterback, and Brad Johnson went to the bench. Casey Weldon came in, and that just seemed to spark everything. Not that Brad Johnson was a very good quarterback, obviously, but Casey Weldon just he threw deeper passes. Like Brad Johnson did a lot of check down stuff and screens, but Casey Weldon was a little bit more exciting, could move around a little bit more, and the offense really took off. And by the time they won the next 5, 6, whatever games were left of that season, they won out. Beat a good Penn State team in the Blockbuster Bowl, which is what it was called at the time. R.I.P. Blockbuster. Those were the days. Sweet, sweet Blockbuster. My dad got really drunk at that game. That's an all-time memory. Anyway, so they beat it. That was a top 10 matchup. Those two teams. So they beat a top 10 Penn State team in the Blockbuster Bowl to finish 10-2, and they brought almost everybody back from that team. So that's where it came from. It wasn't just that okay they were 10-2 last season. They brought the whole team back. They brought Marvin Jones back, obviously. Terrell Buckley. Casey Weldon was a Heisman candidate. And the thought being, if they had started Casey Weldon at least against Auburn, maybe against Miami, they probably would have won the national championship in '90. Like you think about the 1990 national champion, it was Georgia Tech, who finished I think 11-0-1 with a tie to a bad North Carolina team, and Colorado, who lost the game and tied another one. That's how crazy that season was. So Florida State by the end of the year was probably the best team in the country in 1990, and so that was the backdrop to the 1991 season, starting out number one in the country, had stars all over the place in a Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback.
Yeah, I remember the thing I remember about Casey. You brought him up. And I don't know if there's been a quarterback at Florida State that did the play action better than him. I mean, he could sell that thing so good. And I think that combined with having Edgar Bennett, having Ampley, we're going to talk about him in a little bit, having some great wide receivers to throw to, and then his mobility, he was able to use that too. I think a little bit better than Brad. I think he brought that to the table as well. Really kind of opened up what Bobby Bowden wanted to do because he could do anything, and I think that made that offense so hard to defend back then. It's really, especially when you watch this Michigan game, we're going to talk about what that was like. Now, Corey, the build up for this game, like I said, Florida State was preseason number one. They beat BYU to start out in Anaheim. That was some kind of classic. What did they call that one? Remember that one against Anaheim?
Would have been I want to say the
Pigskin?
kickoff classic. But yeah, there you go, Pigskin
Was it
Classic, and
Pigskin?
it was
Okay.
against Ty Detmer was the
Yeah,
reigning Heisman Trophy winner.
yeah, yeah. So they
Yeah,
played against Ty Detmer, cleaned them up. I think in Anaheim, California. Went out to start the season out there. So, so far so good. Looking number one. They roll into this game. FSU number one, Michigan number three. And the thing that's so cool about going to this game, not only when you have a top three matchup, obviously that's great. You had the North versus South narrative.
yeah.
You had, early on, you had what was arguably the number one wide receiver in the country, and Desmond Howard going against the number one cornerback in the country, in Terrell Buckley. And it wasn't like this isn't these days when it's mostly zone. Man, those guys were matching up one on one, play after play after play. So it was mano y mano, and you got those kind of matchups back then. So this really was just going into the game, the hype going into this game was almost at an all-time high.
Yeah, I think for Sports Illustrated was the publication back then in the early '90s, and it wasn't the cover story, but there was a preview story of the game in Sports Illustrated. And for the people that don't remember, Sports Illustrated would only have 4 or 5 stories a week throughout the sports world, and one of them was a pregame, story about the hype of this game. And Michigan had just beaten Notre Dame. Desmond Howard had made a great, I think, 4th down catch against Notre Dame to win that game. And so you had all the hype of them beating Notre Dame, who back then was Notre Dame. I mean, they were whatever they would have been, 3 years off a national championship, and they'd beaten Miami the year before to keep Miami from winning a national championship. So they were really good. Michigan beat them. That kind of woke everybody up to how good Michigan was. And then, you had Desmond Howard, you had Elvis Gerbaugh at quarterback. You had a massive offensive line by those standards of that era. And then you had maybe the most electric player in college football in Desmond Howard.
Yeah, it was nuts. And I think you said you went to the game, right?
I did, yeah.
I'm still, if there's any game I regret not going to throughout my entire life, a Florida State game was this one, because I just graduated from law school. Buddy of mine, a guy I met to be friends, was right next door to me in my first apartment I really kind of had away from school, and he was a huge Florida State fan, and he rented a van to make the trip from Tampa at the time, Tampa to Ann Arbor, Michigan, had tickets, and just all I had to do was pay him for help him with gas and pay for the ticket, and we're going to probably sleep in the van, go up there and watch this game. So I was all stoked, and kind of last minute I chickened out. I didn't want to make that long ride back the next day and then have to go to work, especially if they lost. And I'm sitting there watching that game here in Keith Jackson, just kicking myself, going, man, this is – because, I mean, everything you heard from – I remember talking to Rob Wilson, who's been at FSU forever, and he said that might have been the best environment in his, 40 years he's been around Florida State that he has experienced for a fall football game.
And it was just really neat, too, because you brought up – number one, it was a perfect day. There wasn't a cloud anywhere in the vicinity. And it was cool, but not hot. Not cool, but not cold, because it was like the late September. It was just perfect. It was a perfect. It started at noon. It was the biggest stadium in the country at the time. I think I just looked at the box score. It was like 106,000 attended that game. And what you talked about, which is so true, it was the matchup of styles. Not only Michigan, the blue blood, been there forever, won 1,000 games. Bo Schembechler going all the way back to the 20s. And then the new power coming in, but it was the speed versus the strength, the speed versus the size, and that whole matchup. And that was it was really cool, just a complete battle of styles. And obviously Florida State won it convincingly, but it wasn't an easy game necessarily.
No, when I went back and looked at it real quick, you can go on YouTube and watch this, and they've got a nice, condensed version of the game with all the pesky commercials, which is kind of nice. And, I was surprised how really kind of Michigan hung into this game. We'll talk about that final play that put it away, but really, I mean, they were still hanging in that thing to the very end. But, yeah, let's start out this thing, second play of the game. We'll get into it here. And one of the most famous plays in Florida State history has to probably at least be in the top 5, I would think, and that's T-Buck's pick 6, bringing it to the house. And my favorite part is he's running down the sideline showing Elvis Gerbaugh, and I think there was another player chasing him down, showing him the football, which now would be probably a 15-yard penalty. They could have called the flag before he got in the end zone, right? And they wouldn't even count the touchdown nowadays.
Oh, for sure. He would have gotten penalized for that and for leaping into the stands. It would have been a 30-yard penalty. Michigan would have had the ball midfield.
Yeah, but that was just something that kind of right then you knew this was going to be a special day. When you go back and look, when I looked at this, I couldn't believe how many plays, classic plays happened in one quarter of play. I mean, it was back and forth between these two guys. So, I mean, that stood out to me. I don't know if you have any specific memories of that play or anything else in that crazy first quarter.
So, that was the play of the first. Well, no, there were a few of them. Yeah. Desmond got him back on the very next drive. But, I mean, it was a good back and forth. But, the way Buckley broke on that ball, it was crazy they even tried that pass. I guess they just want to get Desmond out in space. But Buckley was the kind of guy. Now, look, he'd give up some plays because he was so aggressive. Like a Greg Reed. He was just like, to me, a better version of Greg Reed. But he broke on it. It was an out route or a simple stop route. And Buckley saw, if you watch the replay, he sees Desmond Howard stop and then doesn't even look at the quarterback, just goes straight ahead at full speed, knowing that the ball is going to be there eventually, and he turns and breaks on it and intercepts it. So, that was he was my favorite player back then, so that was a really cool moment to see. But something else from that game, Gene, I don't know if you've ever read that St. Bobby and the Barbarians book.
Yeah, I did. It's been a long time, but
it's a great book. And I can't remember the guy's name. I want to say it was Ben Brown, but it might not be. He was a reporter that basically embedded himself with the football program for an entire year. And it happened to be the 1991 Florida State season. And it's really well written and really interesting. And he talks about the pregame locker room speech that Bowden gave the team. And he's like, look, if captains, if we win the coin toss, we want the ball. This is what Bowden was saying. He's like, captains, if we win the coin toss, we want the ball, because I'm scared if they get the ball, they're just going to run it down our throats. They're too big. They're too physical. I don't know if we can keep up with them. And then he paused for like 2 seconds and said, to hell with that. I want if we get the ball, we want to go on defense first, and we're going to kick their butts. Like something around that, trying to get his team fired up. And then, so I think Florida State won the toss, deferred. They ran Ricky Powers for 3 yards or whatever it was. And then on the next play, Buckley invents the Lambeau leap, because Leroy Butler wasn't doing it in Green Bay until he saw Buckley do it in Michigan, is what Buckley says. Interesting.
Another one of the Lord. But then I loved after Desmond answered on the next drive, and then you have just an unbelievable drive from Florida State, and that is it might have been Charlie Ward's first pass ever at Florida State, right? The throwback from Weldon to Charlie, and then he throws it back to Casey Weldon, who goes down the field, gets hammered, but ran for, 30, 40 yards on the play and got him inside the red zone. What do you remember from that play?
I remember that they called it crocodile because they stole it from Florida. Florida had run it against them. Spurrier had run it against them in 1990 in the game that Florida State won pretty convincingly. But late in the game, Spurrier called that play, and it would have been an easy touchdown, but I think the quarterback dropped the pass. So they said, look, we can't call it Gator. We're not going to give them credit. So they named it Crocodile. And I remember being in the stands watching and pointing to my dad saying, hey, Charlie Ward just came on the field. That's Charlie Ward. So we knew something was up, something was crazy. And in reality, you didn't really need a quarterback to make that throw. He just throws it 20 yards to the other side of the field. But, so the people that don't know, they lined up 3 receivers on the left side. Charlie Ward was one of them. Weldon throws it to Charlie Ward. Charlie Ward catches it, looks downfield like he's got to throw a post pass to Shannon Baker, and then throws it right back across the field to Casey Weldon, who has 5 linemen set up in front of him ready to go block. And so, that gets him all the way down to, I think, like the 10-yard line. You knew Bowden wasn't going to go into that game and not do some of the Bowden things that he was famous for.
Now, if you go back and look why they're able to pull off stuff like that, both teams had a week off. So, they had a little bit of time to scheme and come up with some of the stuff for that game. And if you go back and look at the replay, Corey, the one thing that blows me away, and you mentioned it, is when Charlie makes that throw back, you see all 5 offensive linemen just right out there like a wall right in front of Casey Weldon. So it's unbelievable the way that was set up. But I do remember a quote from Casey afterwards saying, if it would have been the other way around, he would have thrown to Charlie. Charlie would have scored on the play. He got blown up.
He got hit really
he fumbled. I think FSU recovered. I think he got hit so hard he fumbled on the play, but they got it back. But then even on that same drive, they were not done with the trickeration. They came up just a little bit short to get into the goal line, and how often do you see a fake field goal for a touchdown in a situation like that when you're down there? And then I believe they pitched it to Floyd. Was that the deal? The holder got it, and they put, I think, Floyd in motion and flipped it to him. What a crazy play that was.
I think Floyd was on the end of the line like he normally was, being a blocker, and then on the snap, he just runs across the line of scrimmage. Brad Johnson takes the snap, and he's got a knee on the ground. But I guess there was a rule in college football at the time, it might still be that way, that if you're a holder and your knee is on the ground, the play's not dead, obviously. You can get up. Mm-hmm. But Brad Johnson didn't even get up. He just flipped it like a shovel pass to William Floyd, who was tripping as he caught it, but he still was able. The play was so well designed, and Michigan had no chance to stop it, that he was able to trip into the end zone really easily. So the first play of the game, second play of the game is a pick six. Then Michigan goes down the field and scores on a great the route by Desmond Howard on that play is just nuts. That guy was hard to cover one-on-one. And then so Florida State gets the ball, immediately goes back down the field on the strength of 2 trick plays and retakes the lead 13-7 because they probably missed the extra point.
I think they missed pretty much. I think they benched, was it Mowry, and they ended up benching him and bringing in like Wimbley or some walk-on, I think, at the end.
Yeah, it must have been Mowry, and he missed 3 extra points in one game, which is incredible. That's Florida State. Later in the year, the kicking position would come back to maybe haunt Florida State. But he missed – I remember that. He had missed 3, and we'll get back more into the game and the fun stuff. But he missed 3 extra points in the first half. So at halftime, while everybody else was meeting, John Wimberly came out, and in front of 100,000 people after the bands were off the field, he was just kicking extra points. just practicing extra points because they had told Mowry he was done. And so, yeah, I think Wimberly made all his, but that was, Florida State missed 3 extra points in one football game.
And I think they might have gone for 2 on 1 or 2 times in the game too, and I don't think they got those either. So they left like 5 points probably on the board just by
Well,
not
and
making
later in
extra
the
points.
game, in a couple of the plays later in the game, they were obvious kicking situations, but they couldn't kick it. Like it would have been like a 30-yard field goal to go up by 17 points or whatever the score was at the time, but they couldn't kick field goals. They didn't trust it, so they had to go for it on 4th and 4 or 4th and 3 because they didn't have a choice. That's where the kicking situation was at that time.
Yeah. But what's amazing, we've gone through all that quarter, and I still think maybe my favorite play of that quarter is still to come. We still haven't talked about it, and that is Amp Lee, one of my favorite runs of all time in Florida State. When he gets the pitch, goes to the left, and has 2 Michigan players have him pinned against the sideline to go out of bounds. And you just never see that in football, to have 2 guys for a major. This is a number 3 team in the country, a renowned defense. And he just does his little, what Amp Lee does, his little stop, and those guys just go flying by him, and it's like nothing, and he just waddles down 44 yards later, scores the touchdown for Florida State. And it was really the showcase for Amp Lee. What a great day he had.
And what I remember about that game being there was our view wasn't the best. As you can imagine, they don't give the visiting fans the best tickets. So he went out and took the pitch and went to the left, and it was a nice run, even if he was gotten pushed out of bounds like he should have. So as soon as I saw him, I thought get pushed out of bounds, I sat down, and I can't remember why. I just wanted a break for 20 seconds. So I sat down, and I wasn't that lazy a kid. That's weird but I sat down, and then all of a sudden I hear more cheering around me, and then more cheering, and I'm like, what's going on? And I stand up, and he's going into the end zone. And I didn't know how it happened until we got back to the hotel at like whatever that would have been, 9 o'clock that night, where I saw the replay of the run. I never saw it live because I sat down. And another thing to watch on that run, if people are going to go back and watch this game, which we invite you to do, we encourage you to do, watch Eric Terrell on that play. He's blocking at the line of scrimmage. He blocks 2 guys for Amp Lee, and then as he keeps going, I think he falls down blocking. And then he gets back up. And when Amp Lee's running into the end zone around the 5-yard line, you see number 7 streak back into the picture and block 2 more Michigan guys. And for the people that know the story of Eric Terrell, which turned out to be it turned out to be a bit of a tragic one, but one of the knocks he had was he wasn't that hard a worker. But on that play, he turned into like LaMarcus Joyner. He just went all out and blocked like the entire Michigan team.
And I remember reading about him. I think they talked about him when they had Dr. John Easton was the wide receivers coach, and I remember that St. Bobby and the Barbarians, and they talked a lot about him and kind of potentially had. And you saw in this game, this is after this game, he did score later. I think he scored in the second half. You really thought this is going to be the next great wide receiver at Florida State, and like you said, didn't play out very well. Getting in now, we're finally through the first quarter. Corey,
What's the score?
It is, I believe, it's 19-10 after Amp Lee's run there.
Yeah,
Michigan did get a field goal.
Should have been 21-10, but they missed 2 extra points.
Yeah. So we get the second quarter, and again, T-Buck comes through again, but this time on a punt return. Now, if you remember, he had a really nice 30-yard punt return to put Florida State in a real good position. And then not one of the most famous tight ends, but really a great play call right down the middle for Casey Weldon to Warren Hart. He's kind of going on his back foot and throws that thing, and it's like a little slant to Warren Hart, running right down the middle of the field and hit him right in the hands, and he just walked in the end zone.
Yeah, and Warren Hart was let's call him a beefy tight end.
Yeah.
He was pretty beefy. But he was another guy that, at least early on that season, he was a touchdown machine. And, yeah, man, I mean, that was the tight ends that day had a really big day, if I remember correctly. They had a really big day to combine. I think Lonnie Johnson had a big catch in that game too. And, yeah, man, that they were Michigan's linebackers couldn't keep up with Michigan's back 7 couldn't keep up with Florida State's skill position guys. That became obvious as the game wore on. And that was probably another Casey Weldon play action too.
Yeah, absolutely was. And I think that actually was that the one. I'm trying to remember one of the ones of the tight end. I don't know whether it was the Lonnie Johnson one or was that one was on a 4th down, because it was like a 4th and 1, and like you said, they weren't going to kick the field goal. And instead of trying to pound out a yard, they threw it and they got a touchdown. I don't remember if it was Warren Hart or Lonnie Johnson, but one of them they got a touchdown on.
I'm looking at it right now. It was late in the game. It was Lonnie Johnson.
It was Lonnie Johnson they did that on. Okay, they did that later in the game, but that was one of those 4th down plays you were talking about where they went for it. So yeah, they got that one. The Warren Hart touchdown. They're up, I believe, 25-10.
25-10, and they went for 2 that time and didn't get it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a missed extra point that time. They just went for two.
Now, what might have been the best catch of the game, and this is unbelievable for Desmond Howard. And I just still, when I remember seeing it live, and I've seen the replay a couple of times, I don't know how Howard caught that ball. Buckley was absolutely draped all over him on the play in the back of the end zone. But Howard came up with that 42-yard touchdown catch, and it really kept them in the game at the half, because I think it was 31-23, I think, at the half. So Michigan's right in this thing. But that catch by Howard, just, I mean, anybody who doubted that he was just a ridiculous player and a major Heisman Trophy candidate, that play just convinced me right there.
Yeah, and Buckley's all over him. It's a good throw, but Buckley's right there to knock it down, and he just, I think, he even gets a hand on it. He trips a little bit. They both start tripping, but I think Buckley gets a hand on it, but Howard still somehow catches it up by his neck in the back of the end zone. But Buckley, unlike the first touchdown where he just beat the brakes off Buckley on a route, that was Buckley running stride for stride with him. And again, it's two great players. Two college football Hall of Famers, and then the one guy just made a great catch. And I know Desmond. Everybody thinks of his Heisman moment as the Ohio State game, the punt return where he does the Heisman pose, because that was really famous. But man, I feel like he locked the thing up against Florida State. He was unbelievable. It wasn't just those two touchdowns. He had a long kick. They wouldn't kick to him. I think they punted to him once.
They pooched all game long. Yeah, they pooched it about to the 25, 30-yard line.
Yeah, but one time they didn't. They cut the one time they decided to kick it deep. He has like a 70-yard kick return, and Steve Gilmer has to trip him up by the heels, or he would have gone 100 yards on a kick return. And it wasn't like he was playing the Sisters of the Poor. He was playing Florida State, and he made him look at times like a high school team. He was so good. He was incredible. Yeah. But anyway, so that made it 25-17 because Michigan could kick their extra points.
Yeah. So something like that. But anyway, I thought it was 31-23 at half. So I don't have the box score in front of me here.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it real quick. So they made it 25-17 on the Howard touchdown. Then they made it 25-23. They intercepted Casey Weldon on the next drive.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then drove down the field and scored to make it 25-23. They went for two and didn't get it. That's a little too early, in my opinion, to be going for two. It was like seven.
They knew it was going to be a track meet, Corey. They needed.
Well, yeah, I guess they thought they were going to start stopping Florida State. So yeah, they made it 25-23, and then Amp Lee.
That was the other one. That note down 56 yards, and this is the one where he had a couple of these plays, but he had one where a defensive back had him absolutely squared up on the play. He just gave him a little wiggle, and the guy, I think he literally fell down.
Yo, he did. He took a knee. So, guys, go back and watch the highlights of it. But I think he catches a long screen pass to get him down to the 5. And then on the very next, great call by, I guess it would have been Rick at the time making those calls.
Well, they kept saying Bobby Bowden because I've watched some of them, and they kept saying, I think we're in that kind of that interim stage, like who's making the calls there. But
probably Bowden.
When you listen to Keith Jackson at the time, he keeps talking about Bobby Bowden's play calling all throughout it. So, I don't really know who was calling what at that point.
So he gets down to the 5, and they run a toss sweep. And again, this was one of the things where my angle wasn't great. So I see Amp Lee take a toss sweep because we were lower in the stadium. We were like the 10th row. And then the next thing I know, he's jogging into the end zone. And I'm like, wow, they must have blocked that one up really well. Like he didn't even have to make anybody. There was nobody over there. Well, no, until I saw the replay. And if you guys go back and watch it, there's a dude right there. I feel like his number is 22. That's him.
He's the All-American, right? Because I know they had an All-American linebacker that I think that was the one where he made him look foolish.
Oh, I don't know. I think the number was 22. I don't remember the name. But he does a shake with his hips, and the dude just takes a knee. Literally takes a knee. The move is he doesn't dive at him. He doesn't get a grip on him. Amp Lee does one little shake. The guy takes a knee, and Amp Lee walks into the end zone. I don't think I've seen anything like it before or since, where you made a guy, a Michigan defensive back or linebacker, take a knee like he just did a touchback. It was an incredible, incredible move by a really, really good football player.
Yeah, seeing him play, I don't think there's a worse feeling. If you're out on an island, you're a defensive back or linebacker, you're saying you have Amp Lee coming at you. I mean, that's got to be, you're going to be made a fool out of.
Yeah. I mean, he was it was like Peter Warrick. Obviously, he wasn't as fast as Peter Warrick, but those kind of moves where if you're one-on-one, there's no chance. It's not happening for you.
Yeah. And then I think Florida State started to pull away a little bit there, and I think shortly thereafter, I don't remember if it's the next series or a series or two after that's when Eric Terrell had that really nice kind of curled back in the end zone, really kind of a diving catch.
Oh, it
and
was a
that was
great
really
catch.
impressive. So I mean, that's again, I was getting all excited about this is going to be the next great wide receiver here in Eric Terrell. He
Yeah.
really, and that started to see at that point. I think we started to see, man, Michigan was not going to stop the offense. I mean, there were so many different ways, whether it was Amp Lee, whether it was thrown to the tight ends. I mean, Shannon Baker had a pretty good day from what I remember then too. I mean, there was just so many different ways they could attack you.
Yeah, and so at the end of the half though, Florida State was up 31-23. Michigan's driving again, and Howard Dinkins intercepts a pass in the end zone with I think like under in the final minute. So Florida State goes into the half up 8, and then if I remember correctly, they take the opening drive, march right down the field, running the ball. I think it was just Edgar Bennett and we haven't mentioned Edgar Bennett yet. It's awesome. Edgar Bennett and Amp Lee going back and forth, taking turns, and then I think they get inside the 5, and Edgar Bennett fumbles trying to go into the end zone, like fumbles it. But Florida State gets a stop on the very next play, on the next series, and then I think that's when Eric Terrell made that catch,
Okay.
and it's a great catch because I think Casey Weldon got lit up as he threw it. It's kind of a back shoulder, but it wasn't intentional, and Eric Terrell like stops on a dime, running a fade route, and just it's you can't teach it. It's just unbelievable athleticism and coordination to stop on a dime, plant his foot in the ground, and dive and make a diving catch in the end zone. It's just a great catch to put Florida State up 37-23. You're not going to believe this, but I forgot to mention that after Ampley's 5-yard run where he made the guy take a knee, Florida State missed that extra point.
And then it's the next drive. I think they stopped Michigan again and went down. And this is what I was talking about before on that 4th and 1 when they threw to Lonnie Johnson for the touchdown. At that point, they're up 44-23, and you think this thing is just completely over.
Yeah.
Florida State's going to boat race them out of the place. And again, just go ahead and break down. I don't remember a whole lot from that play. Then it was 4th and 1. It was a real nice throw from
Yeah.
Casey to Lonnie on that one. So really, I think probably Michigan is so worried, I'm guessing at this point, about what Florida State can do with those receivers, what they can do with the running backs out on the edges that allowed those tight ends to just kind of run free down the middle.
Well, and Amp Lee had 20 rushes for 122 yards, and on 4th and 1, you're obviously thinking they're going to give it to him. But yeah, so think about that situation though, Gene. Let's look at it. It's in the 4th quarter. You're up by 14 points with 6:28 to go, and you're at the 10-yard line. So if you kick the field goal there, you're upset. It's as good as a touchdown. You're up 3 scores. The game is essentially over, but they can't do it because they can't trust anybody to make a kick. So they have to go for it. And then, yeah, it's a play action where I think Weldon sprints out to the right and then throws down in the middle of the field to Lonnie Johnson, who makes it's not really in traffic, but he has to catch it, and then he takes a couple of hits. And, yeah, you're thinking at that point, who did they kick the extra point then? Yeah, John Wimberly came in and kicked that extra point. So that made it 44-23 at that point. 21-point lead with 6.5 minutes left. You're thinking, all right, that's a wrap. And it really was essentially, it turned out to be, but it got a little interesting there in the final 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember at that point. I know Michigan scored. I guess they scored a touchdown there shortly thereafter to cut the thing down. Then they got the ball back again, right? So
yeah, they recovered. Yeah, they scored with 5 minutes to go on a 16-yard pass, and then converted the 2-point conversion. So that made it 44-31, and then they recovered the onside kick, and then started driving again with like 4 minutes to go. So you have a 13-point lead with 4 minutes to go. You still feel okay, but you don't feel great.
Yeah.
It's not over. It's not quite over yet until the play that absolutely ended it.
Yes, of course. Then at that point, you could see if you go back and look at that drive. I mean, they were starting to get to Gerbach. I think they'd worn out that offensive line.
Absolutely,
The speed was getting to him, so he was starting to get hit a lot. And I think he had even was it that drive or the drive before he got hit once and fumbled and fell on it. So you kind of see this coming, and I think then it was Reggie Freeman got a clean shot at him and just blew him up. And what's awesome about the play, it's not a fumble. The ball pops straight up in the air when he hits him. And of all the people, probably, I don't know if he was the biggest guy on the field right then, but Todrick McIntosh, of course, pops into his hand, and we all know him rumbling down the field. And I will never forget him like being held. I think it was one of the trainers or GA or something was helping him off the field because he couldn't even catch his breath. After rumbling, how many, I don't even know, was 50-something yards, whatever that was that he ran for the touchdown on that one. But that was, that put it away, and that was, it was so good to see, the defense finally be the one to put it away because Michigan was moving the ball on them quite a bit.
Yeah, and so you look at the deep, so Reggie Freeman hits it, the ball pops up, 300-pound McIntosh chugging down the field. I remember the Michigan offensive lineman trying to chase them, and it's like, come on, man, there's no chance. I felt actually genuinely bad for him because he was running as fast as he could, but it didn't matter because the only guy that could have maybe caught him was Gerball, and he was on the ground. So it's a 50-yard touchdown, and the whole team jumps on him. This kid, McIntosh, is dying, just trying to catch his breath, just trying to find any air, and the whole team is jumping on him. And I remember them showing the replay on TV that I think he had an oxygen mask on the bench, just like you know how back then they would show, maybe they still do it, but they'd show the kids after a touchdown and they'd all get in front. Hey, Mom, what's up? Peace, 305, or whatever they want to say. They did that with McIntosh, and he didn't say a word. He just kept breathing and wouldn't even celebrate on the bench. So, yeah, that essentially ended it. And what it did do, obviously, Wimberly, hey, good job, man. He made that extra point, too. That became the most points that Michigan had ever given up. And I thought what was cool about it is, the offense scored 37 of those points. Well, if they made extra points, it would have been 40 or 42 or 41. But the defense also put 2 touchdowns together. Even though they gave up some points, they also put 2 touchdowns together. So they did their part as well.
So, yeah, so many people, so many standouts from that game. It wasn't just one person. I mean, just so many stars. And you going back, you look at, I mean, that's the thing. You mentioned that one play from Ampley that was a long screen pass. He had 212 all-purpose yards in that game. I mean, what a great game by him. You go, we didn't bring up his name, but Kirk Carruthers, I think, had 14 tackles in that game. As a kid who grew up in Michigan, I think it was his dad at Michigan State. Was that right? His dad played or coached at Michigan State, Kirk Carruthers?
I think his dad was like best friends with George Perlis, the coach at Michigan State. Like, I think they were in their weddings together. Mm-hmm. And then Kirk Carruthers grew up in East Lansing, and then that must have been great for Perlis. To be like, oh, my best friend has a really good linebacker as a kid. Oh, sure, go to Florida State. We don't need you. So, yeah, Kirk Carruthers, I was looking at that. He had 14 tackles, and Marvin Jones had 7 solo tackles. And, then they had a bunch of Todrick McIntosh. Not only did he have the interception, he had 2 tackles for loss. He had a sack. Howard Dinkins had a sack and an interception. There were a lot of big-time play. Obviously, Buckley. He probably won the Thorpe Award that day. And Howard probably won the Heisman that day. Like, that was a push. Like, Howard got 2 touchdowns. Buckley had a touchdown and 2 picks. He also had a pick in the end zone on a flea flicker that they tried. So Buckley and in the long punt return. So Buckley held his own as well. Just an awesome day.
Yeah, and you mentioned obviously Casey, really good game for him. Really started to emerge as an elite quarterback in college football. Now, I remember the one thing, and being at the game, I don't know if you ever saw this, but I remember at a sports bar with some friends, and what they did at halftime, they had Bo Schembechler was an analyst at halftime.
Oh, nice.
And when they showed him in the studio, like they first would pan to him, you could see he was like in shell shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing because Florida State had put 31 points at halftime on Michigan. That was not only the most points ever scored at Michigan. I'm sure that was the most points ever scored at half against Michigan too. But you could just tell he didn't know what to say. They kept going to him, and he kind of his mouth was I don't know. They're really good. I don't know what I'm seeing here. So that always stuck out in my mind too. That the legendary coach from Michigan was witnessing this and had to comment on it. But yeah, you're right. Great. You sure had the feeling after this one, and I think the next week, if I'm right, next week did they play Syracuse? Was that rainy game in Tallahassee when Shannon Baker
Syracuse
had a big day?
And Syracuse was the top 10 team.
Yeah, so it was great. You had back-to-back. And after those 2 games, you really thought this team was going to play for the national championship. I don't know if we're going to talk about some other games this season, but man, to this day, this is one, like you said, I think this is one of the best all-time FSU teams. But then that game at LSU happened. Another game in the rain. I don't know what was that, but I guess that Michigan game was so nice they'd have all these other nasty games in the rain. But It seemed like if not half or more, the offensive line went out with injuries in that LSU game where they had to fight to come back. So when they had to play Miami and Florida at the end of the year, they just were not the same team that we saw on that beautiful afternoon in Ann Arbor.
No, I think those 2 games, the back-to-back with Michigan and Syracuse, was almost peak Bobby Bowden era at Florida State. You put up 51 on the number 3 team in the country in their house, and then you come back and play a really good Syracuse team with Quadri Ismail. I don't know if Kirby Dardar was still there, but they had some real players. And you put a beat down on them, too. I think you beat them 44-13.
I'm looking it up. Pretty close. Looked it up. 46-14.
So it's 46-14, and one of their touchdowns was an Ishmael kick return.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's right. Yeah.
Syracuse's offense was only 7 points, scored only 7 points. In those 2 games back to back, you're like, man, this is as good as it can get. And I don't know until maybe 2013. I don't know that a Florida State team but those weren't, the competition wasn't as good as those 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks, I think, was about as peak as Florida State football has ever been. because they looked like, yeah, I can't even make a comparison. They looked like a mid-'70s UCLA basketball team. Like you couldn't stay on the field with them. Like Michigan was lucky to only lose by 20, and that was in their house. And what I remember from that game in particular afterwards, Gene, I don't know if you remember it, but there was a semi-controversy because they have a cemetery,
Oh yeah.
like the Barry sod, and literally I remember essentially the whole team started just picking up turf, like just ripping out the turf from Michigan Stadium. Like they all had. It wasn't just one guy came with some scissors and manicured and cut up a little tiny. They were just taking chunks out of the place. And so obviously Michigan fans weren't really fired up about that. But to the victors go the spoils or the clumps of grass, I guess. But I do remember that, and I remember Bowden got a little flack for that from the national media, and I remember reading the papers the next day, and because we were still in Michigan, we flew back on Sunday in Detroit, and they were taking all these kind of shots at Florida State, but not just basically saying, look, this is the future of football. This is the future of college football. Miami had already shown up. Florida State was now the number one team in the country. They're brash. They're cocky. They talk all kinds of noise, and they just hung 50 on Michigan in their place. So get used to it, Michigan fans. This is what the future of college football looks like.
That kind of reminds me of the last thing I want to talk about in this is you mentioned Miami. I think there was still, it seemed like the media was still kind of in the north and the northeast, and I think there was still kind of an underlying perception that this southern football thing wasn't really, it wasn't what it was being cracked up to be, that it's still real football was the Notre Dames, the Michigans, those type of teams up there. Was this kind of the last game to change that narrative that the true power of football had truly moved to the south at this point?
Yeah, I mean, you think about, yeah, oh, absolutely. Because the narrative, like we talked about earlier, was about the big boys, the big strapping, corn-fed Midwestern kids are going to move these Florida prima donnas out of the way easily. And Michigan, Michigan, I think came into that game averaging like 250 or 300 yards rushing per game. I'm looking at it here. They had 120 rushing yards on 44 attempts.
Wow.
So, man, Florida State and Michigan didn't face Marvin Joneses. They didn't face them. Sterling Palmer, the Ostaszewskis. Florida State was loaded on the defensive line, and they proved that to me. I think Michigan just thought they were going to move these little guys out of the way and run all over them. Yeah, they're fast and they got some sizzle to them. They got some style to them, but we're the substance, and we're going to push these guys out of the way and run for 300 yards, and that just was not the case. And I think after that, yeah, I think the narrative probably turned. I know, Miami had already won in '87, obviously, the national title, but then Notre Dame won it in '88, and Miami split it with Washington in '89. Then you had Georgia Tech and Colorado, who were two running teams. Florida State in '91 and Miami in '91. Miami won it that year. Now you're starting to talk about teams that throw it around a little bit. Like in that game, Florida State threw for 300 yards. Also ran for like 160. So they could do both. And I think that's what that proved is, okay, this isn't the WAC. This isn't Ty Detmer having to throw it 60 times to stay in a game. Florida State had some real talented linemen on both sides of the ball, and they were growing them now in Florida. Not all the best linemen were in the Midwest or Pennsylvania and Ohio. Florida had a lot of really good linemen too. And they kind of ran it down. I mean, like I said, Amp Lee had 120 yards rushing.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I'm curious back then. You got to remember still, Nebraska was still a dominant power at that time.
Right.
Like I still forget. It's still hard for me to believe that year Colorado split the national championship. I guess you consider that a northern team. You had Notre Dame in '88, one at Penn State in '86, Oklahoma '85. Yeah, so there were still the northern teams were winning, really going into that, the bulk of them. But yeah, with Miami winning it and then Florida State coming around, it definitely started to change the narrative. Then by the end, you got to the end of the 90s, really, in Florida and Florida State and Miami were all dominant. I think, yeah, it really did change to the south. So good stuff, Corey. So final score, there was what, 51-31? Was that the final?
51-31. I don't even know what the spread was, but I'm assuming Florida State covered it.
I think, yeah, probably pretty close. I tried to look that up, and I couldn't find it. I was curious if Michigan was actually a favorite in the game.
Yeah, I don't know. If they would have been, it would have been like maybe by a point or two.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, a lot of fun, Corey. It was great doing that. We'll have to, I guess when we put this up, what we'll do is maybe have some fans on our message board, warchant.com, go to the Tribal Council. Let us know. What game would you like us to talk about next? Because I think let's let the fans decide, right, Corey?
Absolutely, buddy. We're men of the people.
Absolutely.
We'll do anything you guys want. Anything.
Good stuff, Corey. Hey, be safe up there in Georgia. And, hope you and your family, Brady, everybody doing well down there. And we will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Gene. Appreciate it, man.
Take care, buddy.